Hello again, Fraser Lands Church, and welcome back to Hymn Spotlight. It's a mini-series dedicated to discussing the history and meaning to some of the most beloved traditional hymns. My name is Justin, and as the team leader of worship for our English congregation, I put together this mini-series to reconnect our worship leaders and our congregation with the rich heritage of worship from the past. Our next song is one of the most popular hymns dealing with suffering and lament, and it's also a strong example of how context and story can add tremendously to the witness of God's providence through song. The story behind the hymn, "It Is Well With My Soul," is one of the most well documented and shared. And this is likely because of the intensely tragic and particularly striking circumstances of the song's origin. The story begins in the late 1800s with hymnist Horatio Spafford. He was a Presbyterian layman who operated a successful legal practice in Chicago. He was closely associated with many of the evangelical leaders at the time, like D.L. Moody. 1871 in Chicago was marked by an intense fire that swept through the city. Much of Spafford's real estate holdings were wiped out, and that led him to plan a trip to Europe with his wife and 4 daughters for respite in 1873. However, due to unexpected business developments, Spafford remained in Chicago, and he sent his wife and 4 daughters ahead of him on the SS Vie du Havre. And tragedy struck, and the Vie du Havre collided with an English vessel in the Atlantic, and it sank in just 12 minutes, taking Spafford's 4 daughters with it. Several days later, Spafford's wife Anna landed in Wales with a mere 47 survivors, and she sent Spafford the ominous telegram leading with, "Saved alone, what shall I do?" It is presumed that while at sea, passing near the area where his 4 daughters had passed, Spafford penned the words of the first verse of his hymn. "When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll." But Spafford's hope and lifelong commitment to God did not end with his composition of his famous hymn. He eventually relocated to Jerusalem with his wife and 2 young daughters to establish the American colony. It was a society committed to caring for the sick and the destitute. And though Spafford died of malaria just 8 years later, the American colony still exists today as a hotel run by his grandson up until 1980. Not every hymn we will encounter in this series has such a dramatic backstory. Our last hymn, Doxology, was written simply as an everyday recitation of praise for students. But Spafford's hymn was birthed out of an intense turmoil, and the circumstances add to our understanding and appreciation of the text. The overall theme of "It Is Well With My Soul" does not end with suffering, but goes on to proclaim the restorative power of the gospel. The theme is reflected well in Psalm chapter 46, verses 1 to 3. "God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and the foam and the mountains quake with their surging." With each pressing attestation in the song, whether we are besieged by sorrows, Satan, trials, or sin, Christ has shed his own blood for our souls. Now, unlike many of the traditional hymns of the past, the tune for "It Is Well With My Soul" was written specifically in response to the emotional expression of Spafford's text. His good friend Philip Bliss, a prolific writer of gospel music, penned the tune, which he titled "Vie du Havre," after the doomed vessel. The tune is characterized by an atypical 11/8-11/9 meter, which is accompanied by a repeated refrain. The echoing "It is well with my soul" in the refrain, it creates a responsive environment in praising God, calling the worshiper to enact the bold truth found in the verses. Now, one of the most profound aspects of the song that spoke to me following my research was the generous use of sea and water imagery throughout. Beginning in verse 1, the dichotomic expression of peace like a river is contrasted with sorrows like sea billows roll. And in verse 2, Spafford uses the word buffet to describe Satan's attacks, and it's a word most often associated with the repeated and violent battering of waves and wind. And in verse 4, he uses the imagery of clouds being rolled back like a scroll to contrast the dark and tumultuous clouds that we often associate with stormy seas. Not only has Spafford masterfully incorporated water imagery, but Bliss's tunes, they swell and they shrink like the score, and the ocean's waves are reflected through the notes. The growing melody, it climaxes at the end of each verse, and it settles into a calm and still refrain of "It is well." I can't help but imagine that the refrain is like the calm in the storm, which is granted by the gospel of Christ. It is well with my soul. It's appropriately sung as a song of lament, and many of our services, we use this song in tragedy. The history behind the hymn further emphasizes this point. But let's look beyond the hymn into the future of Spafford's life post-writing and his commitments to serving God even after all that he and his family have been through. All of that further emphasizes that the power of the gospel helps us overcome suffering. In fact, this song is a hope, and it's a decisive hope, expressing the saving power of Christ's shed blood and the anticipation of Christ's second coming. The hymn teaches us not just how, but why we ought to praise God in the face of suffering. It is my pleasure to pass this time over now to one of our fantastic young worship leaders, Megan Tai. And she will lead you in her rendition of Horatio Spafford's hymn. As usual, I encourage you to comment below and share your stories, your memories of how this hymn speaks to you. And while we're listening, I just want to thank you all for your continued support and a reflection of just what God has given to us.
When a peace like a river attendeth my way, when a sorrow like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, you have taught me to say, it is well, it is well with my soul. Though Satan should buffet, though trials should come, let this blessed assurance control, that Christ has regarded my helpless declare